Good morning again. I wanted to just give a quick overview of the Port of Everett. So we are one of the larger ports in the state that actually are not county-wide. We have about 100,000 people in our district, and we've got Commissioner Bachman and Commissioner Steiger here with us today. One of the things that's interesting about the Port of Everett is that we are constantly changing. It's a lot about the ports in this area, but we are the third largest container port in the state. We are a distant third, but what Congressman Larson told us is a bronze is a bronze, so we're going to take it. So we just celebrated our centennial along with the Port of Tacoma, and I think it's important that we reflect on why ports were created in the first place. And we were created to protect the waterfront for the trades, for commerce, for the affordable transit of cargo. And I think sometimes that gets lost. We're seeing that happen, and I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Everett, and you'll see why what Jordan said is very scary, because it's happening right in our backyard as well. So again, Port District Act was created to protect the waterfront for trade. We just celebrated our centennial, and I'll talk a little bit about how our port has changed and what we've got going on and why we're standing here today. So you guys have had enough numbers. Everyone in the port industry has to put up these charts because we have to show our value. But this is the graphic that I want to talk about. It's why it's so important. The port is very focused on creating what we call a balanced waterfront. Our former executive director, Les, which I think I saw in the back, started this concept, and it's really important. The reason we started talking about a balanced waterfront is because in 2011, the Kimberly-Clark property, the mill shut down. And Everett, as you know, is a mill town. It used to be a mill town, not so much anymore. That was the last mill in the city that operated, and it shut down. And it started talking about, well, what should that property be? And I'll show you a little bit more. And guess what they wanted? A park in a federally secure waterway that's highly contaminated, but park, we're gonna go there. So the port started really fighting with the business community to preserve that industrial land. But what we view is a balanced waterfront is everything from the Navy base to the south is our working waterfront. That's what drives jobs. That's what provides revenue. That's what provides all the nice to haves north of us, which is in our waterfront place development. And I'll show you how that balances. So a little bit about the Port of Everett. We're not even though we're the third, we are not a consumer port. We specialize in high value, over-dimensional cargo, specifically for the Boeing company as well as other manufacturing industries. We have a very strong Pacific Rim trade, and what we do is we look for opportunities to grow that as well as ensure the Department of Defense piece with Naval Station Everett, that we make sure that we're a good neighbor and we can respond if anything arises. Tacoma is the only strategic seaport in Washington state. The Maritime Administration is actually looking at other opportunities because they've realized that there is as I can't remember who the speaker was yesterday, but they were talking about how there's a very strong focus towards the Pacific, and we're seeing that. And so the Maritime Administration wants to add additional capacity for strategic seaports on the West Coast. So since 2009, the port has been investing in all of our infrastructure to meet the criteria to become a strategic seaport. We are just finishing up a $50+ million project at our South Terminal, which is going to be the final piece that's going to allow us to compete for that. And then quality of life. So a lot of the jobs that we provide in our working waterfront and the revenue that's created from that provides the quality of life down in our waterfront place development. And it's all about ensuring that we have an opportunity for people to work and play. And that's one of our key messages that we've been working on. So this is a little bit of the port. You can see the graphic over here. It says maritime industrial expansion. That's the Kimberly-Clark property, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But you can see that how close we are to the neighbors. I think our major terminal is 500 feet from houses. And the reason that we were created that way is that the Rucker Hill neighborhood, which is right above our terminal, that used to be the Weyerhaeuser mill site. And what they did is they built all these homes where the mill workers lived, and they walked down the hillside to work. As the economy has grown, things change, the mill shuts down. That is one of the most affluent parts of Everett now. And when you have money, you tend to have the ability to challenge permits, to challenge SEPAs, and the list goes on, and you get into the situation that you mentioned. And it's, I will say, frustrating, to say the least. So I just wanted to give you an overview of that. So I'm not going to go into all this. Jordan mentioned it, but the Port of Everett and Vancouver were the two ports as options in the Container Ports Initiative. These are all the planning frameworks. We use this all the time. Here's why we are important. Here's why you need to not put houses right next to our terminal. It's just words. And so what we do is we have to advocate for that on a regular basis. But the marine port element, Seattle and Tacoma were required. Port of Everett and Port of Vancouver were optional. And our city was very committed to making sure, because our two largest employers in Snohomish County is the Boeing Company and the Navy. So our working waterfront is critical to the overall economy of Snohomish County. And so our city adopted the marine port element in our comp plan, which was great. But my last one, do you see the last bullet? City of Everett's Metro Plan. We got a problem. So the port, the Navy, and our Regional Economic Development Organization fought very hard to keep the area around our port as light industrial. And you can see, based on the graphic, that we were not successful in that effort. And they've changed it to core business district, which doesn't sound very threatening. And if you aren't very savvy in the land use zoning, you wouldn't really think that that would be such a bad thing. Until a couple days ago, when I found out that the core business zoning changed the heights in our industrial lands area right next to our waterfront from 40 feet to 200 feet, and industrial land went from $1 million to $13 million. And that now makes for a 432 unit housing development that can go in right over our shipyard and seaport. And so now we have to figure out, how do we respond? Because that's a lot of traffic, that's a lot of people. We believe we have a social license to operate, and a lot of people think the ports just try to keep residential away from the port because we don't want to deal with it. And that's not the case, to a degree. But the real reason is because there is a social license to operate, and we're not admitting that we're loud, but we can be, you know? And if we have houses right next to our terminals, that just creates an inherent issue that is not necessary. And so that's why land use and compatible land use are so important. And so that's one of the things that we constantly are in conversations with our city about. So these are the laundry list of reasons why we have encroachment concerns. Because we already have houses there, it's we have a very strong community outreach. Our neighbors, I know our neighbors. If a neighbor calls me, I know their number. So we're a very close-knit community, but we want to make sure that we're being good neighbors as well. And so one of the things as we grow, we're working on a overlay. So we lost the fight on the Metro Plan with the Growth Management Act and cities needing to put more housing and get more densities. We understand that. But we want to make sure that when people and developers come in, they do the best they can to not only protect the valuable land, but also protect the residents that are going to be living there. So we're working with our city during the rethink zoning to basically put in this overlay for Port and Navy land use. Essentially what it does is it gives us the ability to get notification on any development that happens in that overlay, and allows us to comment. It doesn't allow us to stop it, but for example, if they're going to put a housing development right in the middle of over our shipyard, we can say, you know, make sure you use triple pane windows, make sure you include air conditioning, because even though it's the Pacific Northwest, I'm sure you guys all have the same issue. In the winter, you get light complaints, and in the summer, you get noise complaints. It's inherent because people have their windows open in the summer, and it gets dark out early. And so there's just different development things that we can do and we can put into place and recommend that can make us working together and living together better for both parties. So we've got that going, and we're hopeful that this year we'll be able to get that in place. Well, I guess it's November, so it'll be next year. So that's a little bit of what we've got going. In terms of Kimberly-Clark, you mentioned the park. So we have a major cleanup going on of that property right now. Kimberly-Clark is actually doing it. One of the things the city asked to have happen is that as soon as the cleanup's done, it gets hydro-seeded. And I don't know if I have a picture here. That's a bad thing, because that would look like a really nice park. So we are actually working with Kimberly-Clark and have our plans in place so that as soon as the cleanup's done, we come in with our grading and start working on it so that they don't hydroseed, because if that is hydroseeded, we were going to have a lot. I'll be up here again next year. So thank you.